Imagine waking up to the smell of roasted corn. Except it's not a county fair, it's your college tuition, your livelihood, and your entire legacy going up in smoke. Thanks to one power-hungry Karen with a gas can and a Facebook live stream. Buckle up, because this isn't just farm drama. This is the Suburban Hunger Games with cornfields, conspiracies, and a Karen who thought she was smarter than a farmer with military training. Spoiler alert, she wasn't. Picture this. It's late evening in a quiet Ohio neighborhood, the kind where people should be winding down, grilling burgers, or arguing over whose dog left a present on the sidewalk. But instead, the air smells like roasted corn on the cob, gone horribly, criminally wrong. Why? Because one woman, our self-anointed HOA president, Brenda Hartwell, decided that the ultimate way to make her point wasn't through a politely worded letter or even the classic passive-aggressive sticky note. Nope, she went straight for the gas can, the lighter, and the Facebook Live button. That's right, Brenda didn't just think it was a good idea to torch her neighbor's cornfield. She thought it would be content. She was giggling into her phone as flames licked the night sky, telling her Facebook friends that farming was so outdated, and this neighborhood deserved something better. I mean, who needs heritage farming when you can have vinyl siding and perfectly identical mailboxes, right? If irony had a scent, it would have been mixing with the smoke that night. Here's the kicker. Brenda had no clue she was walking into a trap. Farmer Marcus, whose land, by the way, wasn't even under her HOA jurisdiction, had been prepping for this moment for 6 whole weeks. Cameras, documentation, legal backup. Imagine playing checkers while your opponent's playing 4D chess with a night vision camera strapped to his corn stalks. That's the level of mismatch we're dealing with here. But pause for a second and let me ask you, what would you do if your kid's college tuition, literal acres of tuition, 30,000 plants strong, was suddenly ablaze because Karen from across the fence line thought your farm didn't match her aesthetic? Would you run for the hose? Would you scream? Or would you, like Marcus, lean back knowing you already set the ultimate trap? Tell me in the comments because, let's be honest, this is the kind of drama you can't make up. Now let's add insult to injury. Brenda was standing at the fence line, clutching the gas can like it was her purse at a Black Friday sale, a smug grin plastered across her face. You know the type. Chin up, eyebrows arched, convinced she's the main character in a Netflix thriller, when in reality, she's the villain in a Hallmark movie gone off script. But here's the thing about fire. It attracts attention. Specifically, the flashing lights, siren wailing kind of attention. As the smoke rose, the distant cry of sirens grew louder. Did Brenda think they were rushing to some other emergency? Probably. But no, those fire trucks were barreling straight toward her. And the smug smile she had while live streaming, gone faster than your phone battery at 1%. Let me highlight the absurdity here. This woman torched someone else's livelihood on camera during a drought in a neighborhood already hostile to farms, all while standing in plain sight with the evidence literally in her hands. It wasn't just a crime, it was a masterclass in self-incrimination. That's not just dumb, that's Olympic-level dumb. But don't get it twisted. This wasn't some spontaneous meltdown. This was the culmination of weeks of hostility, petty sabotage, and neighborhood manipulation. Brenda wanted the farm gone, she wanted Marcus out, and she wanted those sweet development commissions. The cornfield fire was her big finale, her crescendo of chaos. Too bad it also became her undoing. Audience check-in. What's crazier, the fact that Brenda thought fire would solve her problem, or that she thought live streaming it was the cherry on top? Drop a fire in the comments if you think she basically lit her own career on fire that night. And here's where the story flips from outrageous to downright cinematic. While Brenda was panicking at the sight of flashing lights, Marcus wasn't panicking at all. Why? Because he'd been predicting this very move. He knew Brenda's pattern, he knew her desperation, and he knew exactly when to hit record. It's almost poetic. A farmer using patience, strategy, and surveillance to outwit a real estate hustler drunk on power. So to wrap up this fact,
Brenda Hartwell, HOA Karen extraordinaire, became her own worst enemy the second she showed up with a gas can. She thought she was writing the story of a farmer's downfall. Instead, she lit the opening chapter of her own spectacular public humiliation. And if you thought fire was her opening move, oh no, that was just Brenda's big dumb fireworks show. The real war? It started much earlier with a parade of fake complaints that makes HOA politics look like a circus with clipboards.
Now, before Brenda got to her flaming fireworks show, she did what every HOA Karen worth her clipboard does first. She waged war through paperwork, gossip, and weaponized concern. Because why strike a match when you can strangle your neighbor's peace of mind with complaints that read like the world's worst Yelp reviews? Brenda's campaign began with a knock at Marcus's farmhouse door. There she stood, armed with a clipboard, a realtor smile so fake it should have come with a warranty, and the audacity of a woman who'd been in the neighborhood for 5 minutes but already thought she owned it. Her opening line? Complaints about the visibility of farm equipment from the street. Yes, farm equipment on a farm, visible from the street. Stop the presses, people. Civilization is crumbling. Let's pause right here. Have you ever had a neighbor complain about something so obviously part of reality that you wondered if they were secretly trolling you? Like, your tree has too many leaves, or the sun reflects weird off your window blinds. That's the level of nonsense we're talking about. Brenda pointed at Marcus's 1960 John Deere tractor like it was a rotting car carcass. Marcus calmly reminded her that the tractor had been there longer than her entire subdivision. But Brenda didn't back off. Instead, her smile turned predatory, and she dropped the golden HOA phrase, property values. Audience, let me ask you, how many crimes, how many ridiculous HOA wars, how many suburban meltdowns start with the words property values? Do you think people care about community, heritage, or families when they start waving that phrase around? Or is it always about money? Drop a money emoji in the comments if you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, here's the twist. Marcus's land wasn't even under Brenda's HOA jurisdiction. His farm predated Whispering Oaks Estates by 40 years. 40! That means while her HOA could regulate mailbox paint colors and fence heights inside their vinyl wonderland, Marcus's farm was a sovereign nation. He wasn't under her rules. She had no power. But did that stop her? Stopping Brenda from meddling is like asking a raccoon not to go through your trash. It's simply not in their DNA. So Brenda doubled down. She told Marcus that several residents were concerned his farm was killing property values, and that being a good neighbor meant making changes. Translation, she wanted his farm gone, replaced with something shiny, profitable, and commission-friendly. Her veiled threat was clear. I'd hate for this to become unpleasant. And, right on cue, because the universe has a sense of humor, Marcus's rooster, Hannibal, crowed. Imagine that sound cutting through her fake smile like a chainsaw through butter. Perfect comedic timing. Here's where it gets even better. A few days later, Marcus overheard Brenda with a slick-suited developer at his fence line, already plotting how his land could become a luxury townhouse project. She wasn't just being a nosy neighbor, she was actively selling a farm she didn't own. Imagine someone standing on your lawn pointing at your house saying, oh yeah, that'll be the Starbucks drive-thru. That's the level of arrogance we're dealing with. But remember, Brenda knew that legal battles take time and money. What's faster? Harassment. Death by 1,000 complaints. Soon, Marcus was hit with a fire marshal visit over illegal burning, complete with doctored photos. Then came the bogus water usage claims, the sabotage to his irrigation, and neighbors mysteriously showing up with concerns that sounded suspiciously scripted. It was a full-blown circus. Let me throw a question at you. If you knew your neighbor was faking reports to government officials, trying to make you look like a criminal, what would you do? Would you lawyer up immediately, install cameras, or confront them head-on? And be honest, would you keep your cool like Marcus did, or would you lose it after the second fake complaint? I want to hear your strategies down below.
What Brenda didn't realize is that Marcus wasn't just a farmer. He was a strategist, an Afghanistan veteran who knew exactly how harassment campaigns worked. Every complaint she filed, every fake violation she cooked up, every sabotage attempt, he documented it, collected it, and turned it into evidence. She thought she was tightening the noose. In reality, she was weaving her own noose strand by strand. And let's not overlook the comedy in all this. Imagine Brenda storming around with a clipboard like some suburban Sherlock Holmes, trying to find evidence that Marcus's compost pile was attracting vermin. Meanwhile, she's the one sneaking around at night with gas cans and herbicide bottles. If irony had a face, it'd be hers. So, to wrap this fact, Brenda's parade of fake complaints was never about safety, aesthetics, or property values. It was about pressure. Economic, psychological, and social. She wanted Marcus out, and she thought endless paperwork and harassment would wear him down. But what she didn't count on is that Marcus was building a legal fortress out of every single complaint she filed. And just when you think Brenda couldn't stoop any lower with her clipboard crusade, guess what? She recruited backup. That's right, a neighborhood safety committee that turned into her personal fraud army. And oh boy, that's a fact you don't want to miss.
So, after Brenda's solo performance in the Fake Complaints Symphony, she realized even her endless stream of harassment wasn't making Marcus pack up his tractors and ride off into the sunset. No, Marcus was still farming, still calm, still documenting her every move like he was prepping for a Netflix true crime special. That's when Brenda decided, if you can't harass effectively on your own, recruit a squad. Enter the so-called Neighborhood Safety Committee, a group name that sounds like it should be protecting children crossing the street, but in reality was just a fraud factory with clipboards. Let's be clear, this committee was not a group of concerned citizens. It was Brenda's hand-picked army of suburban mercenaries willing to trade their dignity for $50 bills and the promise of HOA brownie points. She told them they'd be documenting violations to keep the neighborhood safe. But safe from what? Corn? Compost piles? The faint sound of a rooster greeting the dawn? Give me a break. Picture this like the opening montage of a bad reality show. One neighbor rolling up in a spotless white Lexus to photograph Marcus's barn as though it were a crime scene, another scribbling notes about dust while standing in a perfectly quiet field, and someone else pretending that a rooster crowing was akin to a war crime. The only thing missing was dramatic theme music and a confessional interview where Janet, clipboard queen, says, "We're just here to help the community, but also Brenda promised us cash." Now, audience check-in. What would you do if a random committee of your neighbors started skulking around your yard with phones, taking pictures of your property like they were paparazzi chasing Taylor Swift? Would you laugh in their faces? Would you call the cops? Or would you, like Marcus, let them dig their own graves while your security cameras captured every ridiculous second? Let me know down in the comments, because I guarantee everyone watching this has had at least one nosy neighbor who could have joined Brenda's little circus. Here's the kicker. Brenda wasn't even subtle. She promised her recruits $50 for every violation they could document. That's right, she literally put bounties on Marcus's farming practices. Compost pile? $50. Fuel tank too close to the fence? Another $50. Tractor parked in the wrong spot? Pay the committee, please. She basically gamified harassment. It was HOA Pokemon. Gotta catch every violation. But this is where things go from absurd to darkly comedic. Many of Brenda's recruits weren't exactly model citizens themselves. Harold, the retired postal worker turned whistleblower, started digging and found out one of them was knee-deep in an insurance fraud lawsuit, another had lost her real estate license for forging inspection documents, and someone else's husband had bankruptcy and DUI issues. Brenda wasn't building a respectable safety committee. She was putting together the HOA Avengers, if the Avengers were broke, desperate, and allergic to ethics. Now, let's pause again, because I want your opinion. Do you think Brenda recruited these people because she genuinely believed they were qualified watchdogs, or because she knew their skeletons made them easy to manipulate?
Drop a bone emoji if you think it was the latter, because honestly, nothing screams reliable witness like someone who just lost their license for fraud. Meanwhile, Marcus was watching this unfold with a mixture of disbelief and preparation. Imagine being a farmer, working land your grandfather bought decades ago, and now you've got a pack of suburban spies creeping around, accusing your rooster of violating noise ordinances. Would you even know how to take that seriously? Because Marcus did something better than laughing. He documented it. Every camera angle, every phony claim, every pathetic attempt to turn farming into a crime was preserved as evidence. He wasn't just defending himself, he was collecting ammunition. The comedy here writes itself. Brenda and her fraud squad were marching around with clipboards like they were auditioning for CSI HOA edition, while Marcus had the real CSI-level surveillance catching them in the act of staging fake evidence. The gap between what they thought they were doing and what was actually happening could have powered its own sitcom. And here's my favorite part. Brenda believed that by sheer volume of complaints, she could bury Marcus under red tape. She assumed that if enough people said his farm was unsafe, unsightly, or damaging property values, the authorities would fold. But what she didn't realize was that Marcus was building a counterattack, piece by piece. She was manufacturing a fraud squad. He was manufacturing her downfall. So, to sum this one up, Brenda's so-called Neighborhood Safety Committee wasn't about safety. It was a ragtag fraud squad bought with pocket change and promises. They thought they were building a case against Marcus, but all they were really building was a RICO-sized conspiracy with their fingerprints all over it. But if you thought recruiting desperate neighbors was bad, wait until you see who Brenda brought in next, because nothing screams totally legit operation like hiring a shady private investigator to cook up evidence so fake even Hollywood wouldn't buy the script.
So, after unleashing her fraud squad of clipboard crusaders, Brenda must have realized that her neighborhood army of desperate sidekicks wasn't enough. I mean, sure, they could take blurry photos of barns and complain about compost piles, but when it came to actually manufacturing evidence, she needed someone professional. And by professional, I mean a guy sketchy enough to belong in a gas station parking lot at midnight selling counterfeit IDs. Enter Rick Polson, the private investigator who could make Scooby-Doo look like the FBI. Now let's set the scene. Brenda probably thought she was some kind of mastermind when she brought Rick into the picture. Here was this guy with a resume that read more like a rap sheet, hired to document Marcus's alleged violations. Except by document, we mean plant dead fish in his creek to fake contamination, spill chemicals near his crops to mimic hazardous runoff, and record noise violations during the legal working hours of a farm that had existed decades before Brenda ever rolled up in her McMansion. You know, the usual neighborhood fun. Audience question time. If you were Marcus and you caught a private investigator creeping around your property planting evidence like some low-budget villain, what would you do? Call the cops immediately? Confront him in the act? Or would you do what Marcus did? Let the cameras roll and quietly build a treasure chest of evidence? Drop your answer below, because personally, I'd be tempted to chase the guy off with a rooster named Hannibal leading the charge. Here's the tragic comic part. Rick was supposed to be Brenda's secret weapon. Instead, he became her biggest liability. Why? Because everything he touched turned into obvious, provable fraud. Imagine a guy so sloppy that his attempts at sabotage were less convincing than a toddler's finger painting. Marcus's cameras caught him red-handed, tampering, trespassing, even whispering about Brenda's plans. The footage wasn't just incriminating, it was comedy gold. But the funniest part, Rick had priors. Oh yes, this wasn't his first rodeo in the fraud circus. He had a history of shady operations, lawsuits, and disciplinary actions. The man wasn't even legally licensed for some of the nonsense he was attempting. Hiring him was like bringing in a wolf to guard your chicken coop, except the wolf has a neon sign over its head that says, "Please arrest me." Let's be clear, Brenda wasn't just crossing the line here. She bulldozed past it. She went from harassment and sabotage into the territory of organized conspiracy. With every move Rick made, she tightened the noose on her own case. It's almost poetic. The more she paid him to stage evidence, the stronger Marcus's counterattack grew. And speaking of Marcus, remember, this guy wasn't just a farmer. He was a veteran who'd spent years in Afghanistan dealing with real-life strategies and actual sabotage. Watching Rick skulk around planting fake hazards must have felt like amateur hour. Marcus didn't panic. He documented every suspicious footprint, every falsified report, every whisper caught on audio. The man basically turned his farm into a live crime documentary. Audience check-in. Have you ever seen someone dig themselves into a hole so deep you wanted to grab them a shovel just to see how far they'd go? That was Rick. And Brenda, she was handing him fresh shovels every week. Tell me in the comments, do you think Brenda actually trusted Rick, or was she just so desperate that she would have hired anyone with a pulse and a business card? Here's where things take a darker turn. Rick wasn't just a PI for hire. He was Brenda's partner in escalation. Together, they plotted bigger and riskier moves, from sabotage to theft, and eventually to arson. That's right. The guy Brenda trusted to help her document fake violations ended up knee-deep in felony charges right alongside her. He wasn't the fixer she thought she'd hired. He was the Titanic iceberg to her HOA cruise ship. And that's the thing about shady partners. When the ship starts sinking, they don't save you. They drag you down with them. By the time Brenda and Rick teamed up for their ultimate plan, Marcus had hours of surveillance footage, witness statements, and enough evidence to make prosecutors salivate. Rick's presence turned Brenda's harassment campaign from petty HOA drama into full-blown criminal conspiracy. To wrap this fact, Brenda thought bringing in a private investigator would give her credibility, but all it gave her was liability. Rick Polson wasn't a secret weapon. He was a boomerang made of legal trouble. Every shady trick he threw came right back to smack her in the face. But if you think hiring a bargain bin PI was rock bottom, think again. Brenda wasn't finished. Her campaign of sabotage was about to get personal. Hoses slashed, diesel spilled, sugar in the gas tank. Get ready, because Fact 5 is where her little harassment hobby turned into full-scale economic warfare. If Brenda's fraud squad and her discount private investigator weren't enough to convince you she'd completely lost the Suburban plot, buckle up. Because this is where things stopped being just paperwork harassment and started turning into full-on sabotage. And not the sneaky Ocean's 11 kind of sabotage. No, this was the sloppy, obvious, caught on camera while muttering about stubborn farmers kind of sabotage. Welcome to sabotage season, HOA Karen edition. The first strike came with the irrigation hoses. One morning, Marcus walked out to check on his fields. Fields that, by the way, were the financial lifeline for his twin daughter's college tuition, only to find his hoses slashed. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. If you're not familiar with farming, let me paint you a picture. Slashed irrigation hoses in the middle of July is like cutting the oxygen tube for someone on life support. Without water, those 30,000 corn plants would wither faster than Brenda's credibility at a town hall meeting. Now, audience, let me ask you, if you discovered someone sabotaged your livelihood, literally sliced up the tools that feed your family, what would your reaction be? Would you go full Liam Neeson, storm across the fence line demanding answers? Or would you, like Marcus, quietly splice the hoses back together while mentally adding criminal mischief to the growing evidence pile? Tell me in the comments, because I know some of you are thinking, I'd already be at the sheriff's office. But Brenda wasn't done. No, sabotage season had just begun. A few days later, Marcus caught the unmistakable stench of diesel fuel near his storage tank. Someone had dumped just enough fuel into the sandy soil to make it clear. They could get close, they could tamper, and they could hurt him financially whenever they wanted. It wasn't enough to cause permanent damage, it was psychological warfare. Think of it as Brenda leaving a calling card. I was here, and I'm not finished. It's petty, It's menacing, and it's absolutely the kind of thing you'd expect from a suburban arsonist in training. Here's where it gets almost comical. Marcus, remember, wasn't just a farmer. He was a military veteran, trained to recognize patterns, anticipate enemy moves, and set traps. So while Brenda thought she was waging war, Marcus was studying her like a chess opponent. Every slash, every spill, every creepy nighttime visit was another data point on his map. Brenda wasn't scaring him. She was exposing herself. Audience check-in. Have you ever dealt with someone so determined to win against you that they ended up making themselves look ridiculous instead? Did you let them keep going just to see how far they'd embarrass themselves? Because that's exactly what Marcus was doing. Drop an LOL if you've ever watched a neighbor self-destruct under their own schemes. And then came the sugar. Oh yes, the sugar. One night, Marcus discovered that someone had poured pounds of sugar into the fuel tank of his tractor. Now, most people think sugar completely destroys an engine. That's a myth. It doesn't explode engines Hollywood style, but it does create this nasty sludge that clogs filters and makes your equipment run like it's got the flu. In other words, it's sabotage designed to cost you time, money, and sanity. Guess who the cameras caught red-handed? Brenda. Middle of the night, bag of granulated sugar in one hand, funnel in the other, flashlight conveniently lighting her own face for Marcus's surveillance system. You couldn't script it better. She looked less like a criminal mastermind and more like a raccoon caught in the trash can, only somehow less self-aware. But here's where the sabotage stopped being funny and started being dangerous. Someone nicked the hydraulic lines on Marcus's corn picker. Just barely sliced them enough so they wouldn't fail immediately, but would give way catastrophically under pressure. That's not just sabotage, that's attempted injury. A farmer working alone could have been crushed or killed if the equipment failed during operation. Brenda wasn't just risking Marcus's crops at this point. She was risking his life. Audience, let's pause again. If you were Marcus, seeing your farm equipment deliberately tampered with, knowing your safety was on the line, would you still keep playing the long game, documenting everything? Or would that be the moment you'd march over and confront Brenda head-on? Be honest, I want to know if you'd have Marcus's patience or if you'd go full showdown mode. Here's the genius of Marcus, though. Instead of exploding, he doubled down on his surveillance system. Thermal cameras, motion sensors, night vision, dummy cameras to throw off intruders. By the end of sabotage season, his farm wasn't just a farm, it was a fortress. Brenda thought she was the hunter. In reality, she was the prey, starring in her own caught-on-camera saga. And the irony? Every act of sabotage only made his case stronger. Fuel spills, sugar tricks, slashed hoses, all documented, all time-stamped, all tied directly to Brenda. She thought she was weakening him. She was handing him felony after felony on a silver platter. So, to wrap up this fact, sabotage season wasn't the endgame Brenda thought it was. It was the beginning of her unraveling. What she saw as clever strikes were actually confessions captured in high definition. And if you thought sabotage was bad, wait until you hear what came next, because Brenda wasn't content with slashed hoses and sugar tricks. She was about to graduate to her most dangerous move yet, arson, live and in color.
By this point in our story, Brenda had graduated from HOA complaint letters to full-on sabotage campaigns. But she still wasn't satisfied. The hoses, the diesel, the sugar, none of it had forced Marcus off his land. None of it had gotten her the golden prize she was chasing, an empty farm ready for her $2.8 million development deal. And when desperation meets arrogance, that's when bad ideas get promoted to catastrophic ones. Which brings us to Brenda's boldest, dumbest, and most self-destructive move yet, arson. Yes, you heard that right. Brenda and her discount private investigator, Rick can't even fake evidence properly, decided the best way to handle things was to set Marcus's cornfield on fire. And not discreetly, not cleverly, but in the most cinematic, self-incriminating way possible, complete with fuel cans, whispered conspiracies, and the literal flick of a lighter under the cover of night. Picture it. A humid Thursday evening, the air still, the cornfields heavy with summer. Marcus, knowing Brenda's escalation pattern like a well-read playbook, had already installed thermal imaging cameras across his fields. These weren't cheap trail cams. These were military-grade, motion-triggered, heat-detecting cameras linked directly to his phone and the fire department's emergency dispatch system. Brenda thought she was playing with fire. Marcus had already turned her into a Netflix special. At 11:47 p.m., the cameras picked up 2 heat signatures moving along the eastern property line. One carried containers, one carried matches. It was Brenda and Rick, creeping through the rows like 2 kids sneaking into a haunted house. Except this wasn't Halloween. This was felony territory. They poured accelerant along a 100-foot section of corn, whispering their evil master plan like villains in a Scooby-Doo episode. Remember, it needs to look like equipment malfunction. Yeah, because that's how farm equipment works. It spontaneously sprays gasoline in neat lines while you're conveniently standing there with a lighter. Audience, let's pause. If you were watching this unfold on your phone in real time, seeing your neighbor literally set your land on fire, would you rush out to stop them? Would you call 911 and wait? Or would you, like Marcus, let the cameras roll so that every second of their criminal genius was documented for court? Be honest, could you stay that calm while your field was about to go up in flames? At 11:52 p.m., the moment came. Brenda flicked her lighter, and the corn ignited like someone had doused it in rocket fuel. Because, well, they had. Flames shot up, orange light painting the night sky. For a brief moment, Brenda probably felt triumphant. Finally, she thought, Marcus's farm was destroyed. Finally, he'd be forced to sell. Finally, her payday was secure. And then came the sirens. See, Brenda hadn't accounted for the fact that Marcus's surveillance system was already wired to send automatic alerts to the fire department the second it detected unusual heat. So while she was busy playing Firestarter Karen, fire trucks were already barreling down the road, sirens wailing, lights flashing, firefighters fully geared up. Within 90 seconds, yes, 90, her little blaze had attracted a full emergency response. Talk about a plot twist. And here's the beautiful part. As those sirens grew louder, the smug look on Brenda's face melted faster than a popsicle in July. She and Rick tried to make a run for it, scrambling through the rows like scared raccoons, but their escape route ran straight into the headlights of incoming fire engines. Imagine the scene. Brenda, sweaty, guilty, clutching an empty fuel can, staring into the beam of a fire truck like a deer in headlights. The irony? Absolute perfection. Audience check-in. On a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfying would it be to watch the very person who tried to ruin you get caught red-handed, in flames no less? Drop a fire if you'd call that poetic justice. And let's not forget the cherry on top. Fire Chief Danny Morrison, another Army veteran who wasn't about to play HOA games, stepped out of the lead truck. His words were simple, sharp, and damning. "Ma'am, step away from the fire line. You're under arrest." Boom! Just like that, Brenda's dream of forcing Marcus off his land went up in smoke, literally and figuratively. But here's the kicker, though. Brenda's arson wasn't just a crime. It was her ultimate downfall. She thought she was burning Marcus's future. Instead, she burned her own freedom, her reputation, and her multi-million-dollar development deal. But here's the thing. Brenda getting caught wasn't even the end of the story, because while the fires were being put out, Marcus was preparing to drop the biggest legal nuke of all. Conservation and easements, racketeering laws, and a courtroom showdown that would turn Brenda from HOA queen to convicted felon. And that's where Fact 7 picks up. The night air was glowing orange, corn crackling like popcorn on an open flame, and Brenda probably thought she was starring in her very own victory movie. But that movie ended faster than a bad pilot episode, because guess who arrived on the scene, sirens blaring, hoses ready, and clipboards legally sanctioned? The fire department. And let me tell you, nothing wipes the smug off a Karen's face faster than being caught red-handed by firefighters who have actual emergencies to deal with. Let's set this up. The moment Brenda and Rick lit the cornfield,
Marcus's thermal cameras had already done their job. Within 90 seconds, dispatch had the coordinates, video feed, and even the license plate of Brenda's getaway car. 90 seconds! To Brenda, it probably felt like the flames had only just started. To the fire department, it was already game time. Imagine thinking you've bought yourself hours of chaos only to get busted before your gas can is even empty. When the fire trucks rolled in, lights flashing, horns blasting, Brenda and Rick froze like toddlers caught drawing on the wall with Sharpies. They tried to run, of course they did, but the only problem was their escape route was directly into the path of oncoming fire engines. Picture it. Firefighters jumping down from trucks, heavy gear clanging, and there's Brenda, sweaty, guilty, carrying a gas can, looking like she just realized crime doesn't pay when it's lit up brighter than Times Square. Audience check-in. Be honest. If you're one of those firefighters and you saw an HOA president clutching a fuel can next to a burning cornfield, what would your first thought be? Would you think, arsonist? Or, this woman needs her own reality show? Drop your answer in the comments, because I'm leaning toward both. And here's where the irony piles on. Fire Chief Danny Morrison stepped forward. His words, short, sweet, and devastating. Ma'am, step away from the fire line. You're under arrest. Imagine hearing that with flames lighting your face, neighbors watching from their porches, and the entire town about to learn you just tried to barbecue a farmer's future. Talk about poetic justice. Now here's the detail that makes this scene legendary. Brenda had set up an alibi. She'd planned to say she was at the monthly city council meeting when the fire broke out. Clever, right? Wrong. Because as fate would have it, she was in that very meeting when the news of the fire hit the room. Fire Chief Morrison's radio crackled. Agricultural fire on Fieldstone property, multiple units responding, possible arson in progress. Boom. Her face went pale faster than milk left in the sun. If you were sitting behind her, you'd have seen her soul leave her body in real time. Audience engagement moment. Have you ever seen someone's confidence evaporate right in front of you? That shift from smug to scared in a matter of seconds? It's almost addictive to watch, isn't it? Drop a scared emoji if you've ever seen a Karen-style meltdown flip like that. At that moment, Brenda knew the jig was up. She fumbled with her purse, clearly trying to slip out of the meeting before anyone connected her to the chaos. But Fire Chief Morrison wasn't about to let that happen. "Mrs. Hartwell," he called out, his voice slicing through the room like a chainsaw. "Mind staying put for a few minutes? Deputies are on their way with some questions." The silence was deafening. Every eye in the chamber turned to Brenda. Neighbors, council members, even people who probably hadn't cared about the farm drama, suddenly realized they were sitting 3 rows away from the town's most infamous HOA villain. You could practically hear the popcorn popping in their heads. And here's where Marcus dropped his nuke. He stood up, calm and steady, and announced he had evidence. Surveillance footage, recordings, financial documents, all of it. He laid out the case right there in front of the entire council, turning Brenda's smug little HOA campaign into a full-blown courtroom preview. If Brenda thought the fire was going to end Marcus's legacy, she just watched him torch hers in front of an audience. Let's pause here, because I've got to ask. Wouldn't you love to be in that room? To see a Karen who thought she ran the neighborhood suddenly get treated like a suspect in front of the entire town? Would you clap? Would you record it on your phone? Or would you just sit back, sip your water, and enjoy the free entertainment? To wrap this one up, the firefighters didn't just put out Marcus's cornfield fire. They put out Brenda's whole scheme. In less than 5 minutes, she went from HOA queen to a deer in the headlights, exposed, humiliated, and on the verge of handcuffs. But as devastating as the firefighter takedown was, Marcus wasn't finished, because he wasn't just relying on flames and footage, He had a secret legal weapon ready to drop, a weapon that made Brenda's entire development deal worthless overnight. And that's where fact 8 comes in.
If you thought Brenda's humiliation ended when the firefighters rolled in and slapped her with an arrest, oh no, my friends. That was just the popcorn-worthy intermission, because Marcus, the farmer she'd spent months trying to break with complaints, sabotage, and literal flames, had been playing the long game. And his ace in the hole wasn't just surveillance cameras or firefighter allies. No. His masterstroke came in the form of something Brenda couldn't manipulate, intimidate, or bulldoze: the law. Specifically, a little thing called a conservation easement. Now, for those of you who aren't up to speed on legal farming jargon, let me break it down. A conservation easement is basically when a landowner partners with state or federal conservation agencies to permanently protect their land from development. In exchange, they often get tax breaks, grants, and the undying gratitude of wildlife. Think of it as putting a giant "Do Not Disturb" sign over your property, but instead of keeping out your little brother, it keeps out greedy developers and their HOA minions. So while Brenda was busy slashing hoses and tossing sugar in tractors, Marcus had quietly filed his land under one of these easements. That meant his farm was locked down tighter than Fort Knox. No condos, no strip malls, no Whispering Oaks Phase 2. Just corn. Forever. Brenda could have thrown every tantrum in the book, but the fact was, Marcus had legally outmaneuvered her before she even struck her first match. Audience check-in. Have you ever played a game of chess or, let's be real, Monopoly, where your opponent thought they were winning only to find out you had a hotel waiting to crush them? That's what this was. Brenda thought she was 2 steps ahead. Marcus was 10. Tell me in the comments, would you have had the patience to let someone dig their own hole, or would you have dropped the legal hammer sooner? But here's where it gets really delicious. By filing that conservation easement, Marcus didn't just protect his farm, he also created a legal booby trap. Because anyone who knowingly tries to interfere with land under a conservation easement can face not just local charges, but federal ones. That's right. By lighting his cornfield on fire, Brenda didn't just commit arson, she potentially triggered federal-level prosecution. She thought she was fighting a backyard battle. Marcus had escalated it to a national battlefield. And it wasn't just about protecting his farm. Marcus also made sure the easement paperwork explicitly recognized the historical value of his land. His grandfather had been farming that property since the 1950s. There were heritage barns, irrigation systems, and even soil studies proving the farm's environmental importance. So when Brenda torched part of his crop, she wasn't just burning plants, she was damaging a federally protected cultural asset. That turned her little HOA vendetta into a felony buffet. Audience pause. Can you imagine the look on Brenda's face when she found out? All those months of plotting, all the sugar and diesel and gas cans, and none of it mattered because the land could never be developed anyway? Do you think she screamed into a pillow? Or do you think she just sat in stunned silence, wondering how she missed something so obvious? Drop a mind-blown emoji if you think this was the ultimate checkmate move. Now here's the cherry on top. Remember the developer Brenda had been whispering with, promising millions if Marcus's farm somehow went up in flames? Yeah, that guy. When the conservation easement paperwork became public record, his deal instantly turned into dust. You can't build luxury condos on land that's legally bound to remain farmland forever. His lawyers bailed faster than rats on a sinking ship, and Brenda was left holding the bag. Not a designer bag, mind you, a metaphorical bag full of felony charges. And Marcus? Cool as ever.
He stood in front of the city council, held up the easement documents, and explained that not only was his land untouchable, but any further attempts to harass him would now risk state and federal prosecution. He didn't just win, he obliterated Brenda's entire game plan with one piece of paper. It was like watching a farmer turn a scarecrow into a nuclear deterrent. Audience engagement again. What's the most satisfying gotcha moment you've ever seen? Was it a boss who underestimated you, a neighbor who tried to one-up you, or maybe a Karen at the grocery store who got shut down by the cashier? Share your best stories. I want to know if anyone's real-life moment tops Marcus's legal mic drop. To wrap up this fact, Brenda thought she could bully, sabotage, and burn her way to $1 million payout. Instead, she ran straight into the buzzsaw of Marcus's legal foresight. The conservation easement wasn't just protection. It was the trapdoor she fell through, dragging her reputation, her finances, and her freedom with her. And if you think the legal trap was the final nail in Brenda's coffin, think again. Because once the easement dropped, Marcus wasn't just satisfied with winning, he went for total victory. Courtrooms, lawsuits, and racketeering charges were about to turn Brenda's HOA empire into rubble. Which brings us to fact 9. By now, Brenda had racked up a list of crimes longer than an HOA handbook. She'd gone from petty complaints to sabotage to full-on arson. But the real finale wasn't the fire, or even the firefighters catching her with a gas can. The grand finale was the courtroom, a place where Karen confidence meets cold, hard evidence, and where Marcus finally got to flip the script from harassed farmer to star witness in a racketeering case. Let's paint the scene. The county courthouse was buzzing like it was hosting the trial of the decade. Reporters lined the steps. Neighbors whispered in the gallery, trading stories of Brenda's reign of clipboard terror. And right there in the front row sat Marcus, calm as ever, flanked by his daughters, while Brenda strutted in wearing the kind of power suit you buy when you think clothes can hide felony charges. Spoiler alert, they can't. Here's where the plot thickens. Prosecutors weren't just charging Brenda with arson. Nope. Thanks to Marcus's meticulous documentation, every photo, every video, every fake complaint, every sabotaged hose, they leveled her with a buffet of charges. Conspiracy, fraud, destruction of agricultural property, harassment, trespassing, and oh yeah, racketeering. That's right, the woman who once threatened Marcus with property values was now facing RICO statutes, normally reserved for mob bosses. Talk about a blowdown. Audience check-in. How many of you would have paid good money to sit in that courtroom just to watch Brenda squirm? Would you have taken the day off work for it? Brought popcorn? Or would you have live tweeted every second with the hashtag Cornfield Justice? Drop your answer because I know some of you would have been front row cheering when the evidence started rolling. And roll it did. The prosecution opened with surveillance footage. The jury watched Brenda sneaking around Marcus's farm with Rick Polson, sugar in hand. They watched her slice irrigation hoses like she was carving a turkey. They watched her and Rick set fire to the cornfield, giggling like teenagers with fireworks. And the piece de resistance, the thermal imaging that showed her face lit up in the glow of the very fire she claimed she had nothing to do with. Case closed, right? But wait, because Brenda wasn't done embarrassing herself. Her defense team tried every trick in the book. They claimed Marcus faked the footage. They claimed the fire was an accident. They even tried to argue that Brenda had been harassed by Marcus's farming practices and that her actions were an emotional outburst. Yeah, because nothing says emotional outburst than organized sabotage with a private investigator on speed dial. Audience pause. Do you think juries have a sixth sense for BS? Like, the second Brenda's lawyer said emotional outburst, I bet 12 pairs of eyes rolled so hard you could hear it echo in the courtroom. What do you think? Could any defense attorney have saved her? Or was this case doomed the second Marcus hit record on his cameras? And speaking of Marcus, his testimony was the moment the tide turned completely. Calm, collected, he laid out the harassment timeline like he was teaching a class. Every complaint, every fake inspection, every sabotage attempt. He didn't just look like a farmer defending his land. He looked like a man systematically dismantling a criminal conspiracy. By the time he was done, even the court stenographer probably wanted to shake his hand. But here's the delicious twist. Remember that conservation easement from Fact 8? Yeah, prosecutors brought that up too. Turns out by attacking land protected under federal conservation rules, Brenda's actions opened the door for federal involvement. Translation: even if the local jury had gone soft on her, she was still staring down a pipeline of federal charges. Her real estate empire wasn't just crumbling, it was radioactive. Audience check-in. I feel another verdict time question coming up. If you were on that jury, how long would it take you to deliver a guilty verdict? 10 minutes? 5? Or would you do it in record time just so you could get outside and text your group chat about the wildest trial you'd ever seen? Drop your verdict time in the comments. By the end of the trial, Brenda wasn't the queen of Whispering Oaks anymore. She wasn't even Brenda the realtor. She was just inmate number 5219 in waiting, convicted on multiple felony counts and staring down a sentence that would make her dream of million-dollar commissions feel like a distant memory. And Marcus? He didn't gloat. He didn't grandstand. He simply stood outside the courthouse, hat in hand, and thanked the community for supporting him. Then he went home to his farm, the same farm Brenda had tried to erase, and started preparing for the next planting season. That's right. While Brenda's future was behind bars, Marcus's was still in the soil. To wrap up this fact, the courtroom showdown wasn't just a legal victory. It was the public unmasking of Brenda's entire operation. She walked in a wannabe HOA queen and walked out a convicted felon, while Marcus proved that patience, documentation, and a little legal savvy can topple even the loudest Karen. But hold on to your seats, because if you think a courtroom conviction was the cherry on top, wait until you see how the community reacted after Brenda fell. Whispering Oaks didn't just move on. They staged a takedown so poetic it deserves its own parade. And that's fact 10.
You'd think the story would end with Brenda in handcuffs, right? Wrong, because the universe, or maybe just karma, wasn't done with her yet. If the courtroom was Brenda's formal takedown, then what came next was her public humiliation parade. And the best part? It wasn't Marcus who led it. It was the entire community of Whispering Oaks, the very neighborhood Brenda thought she controlled like a queen on a suburban chessboard. Spoiler alert, they turned on her faster than you can say special HOA assessment. Let's rewind. For months, Brenda had strutted around like she owned the place. Clipboards, meetings, fake committees, the whole shebang. She thought her neighbors feared her, but the truth? They were tolerating her. Barely. She was the kind of HOA president who fined you for leaving your garbage can out 20 minutes too long while conveniently ignoring her own overgrown hedges. You know the type. And once her crimes hit the headlines, all those bottled-up grievances exploded like shaken soda. Audience check-in. Have you ever worked with someone who everyone secretly hated but nobody dared to confront until the boss finally caught them slacking, and then suddenly everyone had a story? That's exactly what happened here. Tell me in the comments if you've ever seen a whole group flip on someone overnight. The day after Brenda's conviction, the HOA held an emergency meeting, and oh boy, it was standing room only. Neighbors who hadn't bothered showing up for years packed the room, eager to watch the Queen's crown get tossed in the trash. One by one, residents stepped up to the mic and aired their grievances. Complaints about fines, about harassment, about Brenda's ridiculous obsession with property values. Someone even brought receipts. Literal receipts showing Brenda had misused HOA funds to buy committee refreshments that suspiciously looked like spa days. By the time the meeting ended, Brenda wasn't just fired as HOA president, she was banned from holding any HOA office ever again. Imagine being so hated that your neighbors literally changed the bylaws to make sure you never get a clipboard in your hand again. That's not just a clapback, that's a constitutional amendment of petty revenge. And it didn't stop there. The community decided they weren't just going to erase Brenda, they were going to rebuild Marcus. Neighbors volunteered to help repair his equipment, donated supplies for the next planting season, and even set up a local festival called Corn Day to celebrate his farm. Kids painted signs, families brought casseroles, and suddenly Marcus's cornfield wasn't just a piece of land. It was a symbol of resistance, resilience, and the sweet buttery taste of sticking it to Karen. Audience pause. Tell me, wouldn't you love to go to a festival born out of spite against an HOA tyrant? Corn dogs, lemonade, maybe a dunk tank with Brenda's face on it? What's the first booth you'd visit? Drop your answer. I'm thinking roasted corn on the cob with a side of poetic justice. And here's the kicker. The same developer Brenda had courted, whispering promises of townhouses and Starbucks, came crawling back after the easement news broke. He offered to support the farm festival to save face. Marcus, ever the gentleman, let him sponsor the porta potties. That's it. The man who wanted to bulldoze his farm got to plaster his logo on toilets. You can't write satire better than real life. But my favorite moment of the clapback came 6 months later when the county announced a new heritage farming program. Guess who they named the pilot project after? That's right, Marcus. The guy who survived sabotage, arson, and HOA warfare now had a county-wide program in his name, ensuring other farmers had legal and financial protection. Meanwhile, Brenda's name had become shorthand for neighborhood tyranny. Kids were literally using "don't go full Brenda" as playground slang. That's legacy, folks. Audience check-in one last time. What do you think is the ultimate punishment? Brenda's prison time, her public HOA ban, or the fact that her name is now basically an insult? Personally, I think the slang wins. Imagine being remembered forever as the cautionary tale of suburban pettiness. Drop a trophy if you agree. To wrap this fact up, the community clapback wasn't just revenge, it was renewal. Whispering Oaks went from a neighborhood under Brenda's thumb to a place united against her nonsense. Marcus didn't just get his farm back, he got his dignity, his legacy, and a community that finally realized what really mattered. And Brenda, she got the permanent title of that crazy HOA lady who tried to burn corn. And that, my friends, is where the saga ends. But the lessons? Oh, they're just getting started. Because this wasn't just a fight over corn. It was a story about greed, power, resilience, and why you should never underestimate a farmer with cameras and patience. Stick around, because I've got some final analysis, and I want your take too.
So let's zoom out for a second. What started as a petty HOA turf war ended as a full-blown crime saga with sabotage, arson, firefighters, courtroom drama, and a community clapback so poetic it deserves a Netflix adaptation. But beyond the sheer chaos, this story has some deeper lessons worth chewing on. Kind of like sweet corn at a county fair, but with a side of sarcasm. Lesson 1, never underestimate patience. Marcus didn't win this war by screaming louder or by matching Brenda's sabotage with his own. He won by documenting, by planning, and by letting Brenda self-destruct on camera. It's proof that sometimes the best weapon isn't aggression. It's letting your enemy hold the shovel while they dig their own hole. And man, did Brenda dig. Lesson 2. Power makes people sloppy. Brenda thought being the OHA president made her untouchable. She believed her title gave her the authority to reshape reality. Cornfields into condos, neighbors into henchmen, sabotage into community service. But power built on fear and arrogance is like a sandcastle. Looks impressive until the tide rolls in. And when that tide was Marcus's evidence, her whole empire collapsed in seconds. Lesson 3. Community matters. The real twist here isn't just that Marcus survived. It's that the neighborhood, once divided, rallied around him. The same people Brenda claimed to protect turned on her and embraced Marcus's farm as their heritage. In the end, the community didn't just reject Brenda, they erased her, rebuilt stronger, and made her downfall part of their collective identity. Whispering Oaks became corn country, and that's a glow-up if I've ever seen one. And here's my personal take. Brenda's story is a masterclass in how not to live your life. She could have been a decent neighbor. She could have worked with Marcus, maybe even built her reputation as the HOA president who balanced tradition and progress. Instead, she chose ego, greed, and fire. And all she got was a prison sentence, and her name turned into a playground insult. The legacy you build is the one people give you. And Brenda's legacy is don't go full Karen. Now, audience, I've got some questions for you, because this channel isn't just about telling you what happened, it's about hearing what you think. What do you think was Brenda's biggest mistake? Was it the arson, the fake complaints, or was it underestimating Marcus's patience and strategy? If you were Marcus, what moment would have broken your patience? Would you have snapped after the hoses, the sugar and the tractor, or would you have held on all the way to the courtroom like he did? And most importantly, do you think your community would rally like Whispering Oaks did, or would they keep their heads down until the dust settled? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I guarantee every one of you has a Brenda story in your own neighborhood, office, or even family. And honestly, I want to hear them. Now, if you've made it this far into the video, you're officially part of the HOA War's inner circle. You know the rules of suburban combat, the dangers of rogue clipboards, and the power of documentation. So, here's what I need you to do. Smash that like button if you enjoyed watching Brenda's downfall as much as I enjoyed telling it. Subscribe to the channel if you want more wild HOA stories, courtroom takedowns, and suburban comedy that makes reality TV look tame. And most importantly, share your own HOA or neighborhood horror stories in the comments, because who knows, your story might just be the next saga we dive into. Because at the end of the day, HOA wars aren't just about lawns, mailboxes, or corn. They're about power, people, and what happens when petty rules collide with real lives. And if there's one thing we've learned from Marcus versus Brenda, it's this. You can burn crops, but you can't burn the truth. So, don't go full Karen, stay sharp, stay neighborly, and remember, if your HOA president shows up with a clipboard and a smirk, maybe check your fuel tanks. I'll see you in the next battle.